Yvonne is a really good friend of mine. Yeah.
He told me that. I was very excited when he mentioned it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness.
So I just wanted to wave and say hi to her.
He mentioned that he's going to be a life. I think we will be ever.
And I can be.
Every time you'll be in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
That's further. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
You're back.
I'm so happy that you brought me back. So thank you.
It's all good.
Thank you.
So you'll just say, thank you everybody for my first public event, you know, that kind of thing, just to get to the stage.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. So good to see you again. Hi. Hi, okay. So can we start? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here today with us. Thank you so much, Emma and Jennifer, for helping us to organize this public event. This is my first public event at the University of Chicago and the IOP. Last semester, I was a Pritzker Fellow. It was an amazing experience for me. We had amazing seminars, 7 sessions, where we invited freedom fighters, activists, presidents, survivors from genocide, survivors of torture, advocates, experts from international organizations. All of them attend our seminar to inspire us, to help us to understand that ordinary people can create extraordinary changes around the world. And for that, the only thing that we need is willingness and, of course, to be uncomfortable with the situations that we are facing. But each of us have the power to change our societies or to contribute with the current system. And that's our personal choice. So for today, what we are going to do is to discuss about opposition in very difficult times. And for that, what we organized was an amazing panel with 3 different guests. We have our first guest who is here with us, Jiore Craig. So let's give her an applause. She is an amazing global leader who is known for her advocacy against polarization, also disinformation. She has been supporting global democratic movements around the world. And most importantly, she is from Chicago. So I'm really happy that she is with us today here. Then we will have our second panelist. He's already here with us. He's Dr. Lobsang Sangay. He is the first president elected for the administration of the Tibetan government in exile. So let's give him an applause. And then we are going to receive a third panelist who is an amazing pastor. He is also an amazing human rights advocate. He was a political prisoner in his country because, well, he was leading a democratic movement. His name is Ivan. He's joining soon, but let's start with our conversation. I don't want to explain more about them because the idea is that them can introduce themselves, you know. They are the best people to tell their own stories. And what are we going to explore here are 3 basic questions. So the first one is, who are they, right? because, well, we want to know them. So that is going to be the first question. The second one is about the challenges that they have been facing, fighting for democracy or freedom. And the last one is about hope. Why are they doing what they are doing, even today, when sometimes we could have the perception that maybe democracy is losing this fight. So let's start with Mr. Sangay, and let's ask him. Okay, so first, who you are, what do you do, and finally, what was the moment that sparked your fight? Why you start doing what you are still doing today? So thank you so much, and we are here to listen to you.
Oh, I'm mute. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Lobsang Sangay. I'm privileged to be with you all, although through Zoom. Who am I? I think God knows. But I think I have been an activist, and I have been an academic, and I've been an administrator in the sense I was elected as the president of the Tibetan government exile, and I served 2 terms. So, like many of you, I've been running around, mainly in India and Delhi, organizing various protests and, activism throughout my youth. In fact, I told my alma mater, Delhi University, that had they checked my attendance in front of Chinese embassy and my college, the attendance in front of Chinese embassy in my first year was, I think, 55% and 45% at school. Then my attendance at the college decreased to 40% and 38 decreased to 34%. Even the principal said I can't sit for my exam because my corresponding attendance in front of Chinese embassy protesting and organizing events was 100%. So that's how I grew up. And then I got my Fulbright scholarship to do my master's degree in law at Harvard Law School. Then did my doctorate degree at Harvard Law School. And then I was a fellow. Then I got elected in 2011 when His Holiness Dalai Lama decided to devolve his political authority. And I decided to run for the position to be the president of Tibetan government exile. And I got elected in 2011 and then re-elected with 69% of the vote in 2016, and I served till 2021. And now I'm back at Harvard as a lecturer and a senior fellow. So essentially, that is me. I grew up in a refugee camp with, nothing much. So I have a long story, which will take hours, to tell you how I struggled through and, overcame so many obstacles. What triggered me to be an activist, an academic, and a freedom fighter? Essentially, Tibet is under occupation of China. Some of you might not know that Tibet is as big as California and Texas combined. So landmass, land-wise, is huge. It's very rich in natural resources. You just name it: lithium, uranium, gold, copper. It's all there. 75% of reserve of lithium of China is in Tibet. And also Tibet is the water source, 10 major rivers of Asia, of which 6 come from Tibet, and so on and so forth. So having heard about occupation of Tibet, exploitation of Tibet, and how my parents and the elder generation were forced to flee from Tibet to India and struggle through, I grew up with these stories, and it always dawned on me that I should contribute towards my cause because I am a Tibetan. Tibet is under occupation. And I pledged myself that till I die, I'll breathe Tibet, I'll speak about Tibet, I'll fight for Tibet and Tibetans. So, and His Holiness Dalai Lama has led our movement for so long, and he's approaching 90 years old. And all the more reason why Tibetans should continue his legacy and to fight for freedom. So that essentially is my background. And, as to why I am who I am even now.
Thank you so much for this personal story that you are sharing with us. I have just one question. So, where you were born? Because you mentioned that you grew up in a refugee camp, but where you were born?
I was born in India in a place called Darjeeling, which is known for tea. Now, America drinks more coffee. So, but each time, you have option, you just look for Darjeeling tea is one of very famous. In Britain, in England, they know about it quite well, actually. So, I grew up next to a tea garden in a very small village, very remote, 6, 7 Tibetan families. And, I used to fetch grass for our cows, go to the forest, cut, wood for our home. I literally grew up studying in a refugee camp and in a place called Darjeeling.
That's impressive, and I wanted to clarify this question because for me, it's so hard to understand how someone who was not even born in Tibet has become such an important voice for their people, and how just that your family comes from there and that you grew up in a refugee camp has like shaped your personal story and how you have committed till you die, to regain Tibet, to recover freedom for your people and to return to the land that you never had the opportunity to visit. So thank you so much for this personal story that you are
Yeah,
sharing
if I
with
may
us.
just add, yes, I've never seen Tibet because I'm banned from entering to
Yes.
Tibet, right? So I had a choice. If I be an activist, I'll be banned more. So I chose to be banned, then speak out for Tibetans, then appease the dictator authority regime that I get to visit Tibet, and then compromise my principles and sacrifice the sufferings of 6 million Tibetans in Tibet.
Thank you so much for this personal story, and for us, this is very touching because, well, sometimes we feel the connection because we are here or because we grew up in this context. But in your case, you couldn't even visit your country. And as you mentioned, this is your personal choice because for you, it's more important to fight for your people than, well, maybe to be there just for a couple of days. So I know that this is going to give us more opportunities to reflect on other aspects. But before doing that, let's listen to the personal story of Jiore. So Jiore, who are you? How you start fighting for democracy?
Thank you so much for having me, and I feel really honored to be on a panel with such incredible people. Who am I? I wear many hats. I have been called a strategist, an activist, a researcher, a policy expert, but ultimately I am a girl who grew up on the south side of Chicago. My dad coached football at an all-boys Catholic school. I grew up in a parish environment, so really raised by a village, which has driven a lot of what motivates me. I ended up having a teacher who pulled me out of cheerleading and told me to join Model UN, and that really set up the trajectory for my life. So I started as an international political consultant, helping people get elected in other countries. And then the moment that really sparked, what I would say is me speaking out was the 2016 election, where I actually didn't know that this would happen, but I observed in the US, I had been traveling all over to different parts of the world for the first part of my career, but I noticed that back home in the US, as they confronted the 2016 election results, there was a really deep misunderstanding relative to what I was understanding about information ecosystems. And I am an expert I think about digital information ecosystems and their relationship on public trust, civic behavior, and ultimately power. And the concentration of power has always been a really interesting thing for me. Having a coach as a dad, I believe in efficient teams. And I believe that there is an opportunity to work in teams. And I believe the human experience is a collective one. And if you try to say that it's not, or if you try to ignore that, the human experience will prove to you over
Yes.
and over that it is a collective experience. And then I also really deeply believe in freedom. And I think that that's a unique attribute that we're sort of raised and conditioned to believe in freedom, even if we come to understand that that it may be an illusion in many ways, in how we've experienced our freedom and how other Americans have experienced freedom historically in our country. So in 2016, I recognized that there might be a role for me in talking to what we call in public opinion research, the opinion elite, about what they were misunderstanding about the online world. Pretty much, sometimes I paraphrase and say my job has been explaining the internet to older people. And
Okay.
it's more complicated than that, but it also comes down to that. So that's it. I'd say that's the summary.
But that's a beautiful summary. And for me, it's amazing that you mentioned how just like being here and how being involved in Model United Nations, and also how just to be worried about how people perceive and get information has somehow turned you into this like powerful woman who wears different hats at the same time, but that can contribute tremendously to her own society. So I would like also to share a little bit of my own personal story, just to be fair also with my panelists, because it is not nice for me that I ask them personal question and then I'm not sharing nothing about me. So I'm Génesis Dávila. I consider myself a human rights defender. I went to law school in Venezuela, and I could say that I always wanted to be a lawyer since I was like, I don't know, 6 years old. That was pretty clear for me. I wanted to help my people. My dream was maybe to be a prosecutor or a judge, or why not one of the justices of my country. And I worked hard for that. I attend law school for 5 years. I was studying late for all my finals. I graduated as valedictorian of my class. I was also involved in Model United Nations. And I believe that is the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today. But as soon as I finished law school, I started working for the judicial system in Venezuela. And actually, that was a public requirement from my university. So when I started working for the judicial system, I believed that I was about to fulfill my dreams, that I was working for the National Prosecutor's Office, and that, well, maybe I will be very successful as a lawyer in Venezuela. But sadly for me, that was almost like the end of my dreams. Because as soon as I started working for the judicial system in Venezuela, I could notice that the judicial system was controlled by the executive branch. So judges, prosecutors, and public defenders, they were not serving justice. Actually, they were just serving the regime. And I didn't went to law school. I didn't study late to be a servant of the regime. I went to law school because I wanted to serve justice. I wanted to serve my people. So I decided that that was not my path. So I got very lucky and I got an internship here in the US at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And that internship changed my career and my path and my personal journey. So because of that internship, I understood how lawyers and human rights advocates, they have second options. You know, when the national legal system is not working, you can apply to the international legal system, and maybe you can do something there for your own people, you know? So I decide, okay, so if our national legal system is not working, I will not settle with that, you know? I'm a lawyer, I have tools, and I can contribute with my tools to my society. So I start filing cases to international bodies and courts. And today we represent over 2,000 victims of human rights violations from Venezuela before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, United Nations, or the International Criminal Court. So for me, to not settle to the national legal system that was not providing justice, but was actually just executing the orders of the regime was what ignited my fight. So we have here with us our friend Ivan from Zimbabwe, and I want now to hear his own personal story. So Ivan, I know that you are just coming from a medical appointment, so thank you so much. Let's give him an applause because he's here with us, and we want to explore your personal story. So who are you, and what was that thing that pushed you to start fighting for democracy in your country? So just a 3-minute answer, but we are pretty interested in listening your story. Thank you so much.
I don't know if you can hear me clearly.
Perfect.
Okay, it sounds like you can hear me perfectly. My apologies. I had an emergency.
Don't worry.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to keep my shades on. They've just dilated my eyes, so everything is bright. And so I'm gonna keep my shades, and I don't normally do that. But thank you for asking me to come and just be part of you guys. I had hoped to be there in person, but that didn't work out because I really enjoyed the interactions with you guys. My journey begins in Zimbabwe in 2016. That's this part of the journey of my life, where I was pastoring a small church of about 40 people. And if you know changes we've had have been on multiple levels and for an extended period of time. The most egregious of those challenges have been the political and the economic challenges. To give you a good idea of what we were dealing with in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe had been president since 1980, and in 2016, when I then began my journey of speaking truth to power, he had been in power for 36 years and he was 93 years old. But to stay in power, Robert Mugabe had to be extremely brutal, which included murdering people who were dissenters over the years, including thousands of people in the south of the country. And even later on in his rule in 2008, he lost the election and simply refused to step down. Instead, he offered to share power with the candidate who had beaten him in the election from the opposition. He remained president, and the opposition leader assumed a ceremonial prime minister role. And that's something that really brutalized our constitution, but more than anything else, it devoured the spirit of democracy within Zimbabwe. To punish the people that Robert Mugabe felt had voted against him, he went into the areas that voted against him in that election, and people were given a choice for punishment where they would choose. They called it long sleeve, short sleeve, and it's a punishment where people in a community choose whether the arm is chopped off either at the wrist or at the elbow, and that was punishment so that they would remember how to vote in the next election, or if anyone saw a person with a missing limb, that person would also know how to vote. And so this was the situation. But in 2016, the economy began to crash again. That's where I started speaking truth to power. I started by recording a 4-minute video which challenged our citizens to speak up against the injustice that was happening. To give you an idea, our economy was running at 286 million% inflation. That meant the largest banknote was this banknote. This is just a replica of the banknote. This is a $100 trillion note. $100 trillion. And at the height of inflation, this was enough to buy 2 loaves of bread. I remember when I went to buy bread in 2008, I stood in the line to buy bread, and all I could buy by the time it was my turn to buy, when I started in the line, I could buy 2 loaves, but when it was my turn to buy 2 hours later, I could only buy half a loaf. And so in 2016, that crash had begun again. That's where I began my journey by recording a 4-minute video in my church office that simply said to our citizens, where are you when these injustices are happening? What is our role when it comes to defending our freedom? What is our role when it comes to speaking up for the weak, for those who cannot speak for themselves? Are we ever going to do anything? And if we are going to do anything, then the time is now, and we must figure out and decide what we will do. And that's where my journey begins.
Thank you so much, Ivan. That's really powerful. And as you might notice, all of us are coming from very different contexts, from very different cultural backgrounds. Actually, also, we come from different professions, but at the end, what has put us to work in favor of democracy and to work for our people is actually to not be happy or to not settle with the current situation of our countries. And I believe that working for our people and for our country also provide us the opportunity to work for a better world because, well, even from Zimbabwe, Dr. Lobsang from Tibet and Jiore from Chicago, now they are global leaders, but years ago, they were just regular students, just like you, or, just regular citizens, but they decide to fight for their people, and now they are creating a global impact. So let's explore our second question, which is about the main challenges, because fighting for democracy, fighting for freedom, standing up for your people is not an easy task. Otherwise, everybody will be doing this, right? So it requires a lot of courage. So I want to know what were the main challenges in your career as, activists, pastors, global leaders. So let's start again with Mr. Sanjay, please. Could you tell us about one of the most difficult times that you have faced to work for the Tibetan people?
Yeah, challenges are many because you're dealing with the Chinese government, recently,
We can
I
imagine,
think, in Russia, they had this victory day, they paraded all the military arsenal. And clearly you saw, Maduro from Venezuela and all the dictators lined up on stage. So you are dealing with a system, a global authoritarian system, and everything you do, say, or go, you will be, tracked and followed. And I was giving a talk at Cornell University. My flight was at, 6 p.m. And there was this Asian-looking guy who greeted me and took a photograph. And then I found him at the audience, at the faculty dinner. Next morning at 6:15 a.m., he was again there at the airport. So later I found out that he was sent by the Chinese embassy, So as I said, I'm banned from going to Tibet, and I have faced protests in Cape Town, in South Africa, with manual laborers, University of Toronto. So so at personal level, there are many challenges as well. And then now the Chinese system, I just want to say, there's so much criticism about America-led world system or West-led world system. Despite all the hypocrisy and double standard, we should be aware that the Chinese, world system is much worse and than what you see and what you experience now. For example, there are around 102 police stations in 50 countries. Chinese police stations, including in New York and in Europe and Netherlands and Africa and Asia. So the surveillance system that the Chinese government had, it's called Vision or Dahua, the companies, they sell their surveillance system. In China, they can monitor everybody, and everything. And they have sold their surveillance system to 67 countries around the world. Literally, they can follow you, track you down. And that's the system you're dealing about. And then we all know, as for Freedom House, in the last 19 years, there has been a consecutive decline of freedom around the world. So 60 countries have backslided democratically, only 32 have progressed. So in this global context, the challenges are many. So the Chinese, when you ask me for my challenges at a personal level, and at a societal level, and at a global level, the Chinese world order and the system that you're dealing with is very serious and very severe. And I have been through many, many challenges, so there are so many to list. But despite all the challenges, you move forward because ultimately, if we don't contribute and make differences, if we don't fight the fight, if the good people don't fight, then the bad people will win and the evil will prevail. So, that's a stark contrast for me. So that's why I'm in it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now let's go with Ivan. So what are the main challenges for you?
Well, I think just in a similar way, the challenges that rose up for us when we started, many of those remain now. When I began in 2016, we were just ordinary citizens, like you said. We were not politicians. We were not in civic society, had not been involved in any form of political campaigning, but just were concerned for our future. But what that led on to, when that little video began, and then we decided that we would start a citizens movement, which was being built online, because the challenge in Zimbabwe was that you were not allowed to protest in the street against the government without the government's permission, which is a very smart concept, if you ask me. Very, very, very stupid. But that is how autocrats operate. So what we had to do was to figure out a way in which we could teach people how to speak truth to power and participate in ways that were safer, not completely safe, because it's not possible to be completely safe. There is going to be some danger involved. We had to find a way to teach people to speak truth to power in ways that were safer, but ways that allowed them to grow their courage. And so we began these different campaigns. The biggest one we did was what we called the Shutdown Zimbabwe protest. And it's a day that we chose that we would shut the country down. I recorded a short video and asked Zimbabweans across the country to stay at home, to not go to work, to not open their businesses, to not go to the supermarket, to not go to the bank, but stay at home and bring the entire country to a complete standstill. And on the 6th of July 2016, 2 days after calling for that protest wildly succeeded in ways that I never thought possible. Over 12 million people participated in that, and the entire country came to a standstill. I was immediately arrested and thrown into a maximum security prison where I was beaten and where I was tortured. Now, I'll stop there because the story continues. But part of the challenge was, even after I had been able to escape, what the government of Zimbabwe was able to do was to work through international agencies to try and extradite me from the different countries that I was escaping through, because I had to go through multiple countries with my family. One of those international organizations is Interpol, and Interpol attempted to issue a red notice to have me extradited from South Africa. But fortunately, we were able to leave South Africa before that red notice could be issued, and we landed here in the US. But 6 months after arriving in the US, my daughter was born. Actually, when once we got here, I really felt it was important for me to go back, because the thing that dictators and autocrats want the most, the thing that they crave the most, is to be feared. And I had been teaching people to be courageous, but in this moment, I ran away and did exactly what the dictator wanted. So after 6 months of being here in the US, I felt it was important for me to make the journey to go back to Zimbabwe and continue the work. And so I left my family here and took a flight back. I arrived in Zimbabwe and was arrested immediately at the airport and taken straight back to the maximum security prison. But that was a victory for us because we had taken away that one thing that the dictator wanted, which is for me to have run away, for others to follow suit, and to know that you don't challenge them. So fear is a big challenge that dictators use to keep people quiet or to instill that sense of apathy so that citizens start to feel like politics is none of my business and I don't want to get involved. And I'm glad that we were able to cross that bridge. We were able to push that narrative back for another 3 years whilst I was in and out of prison until eventually we saw the removal of the dictator, Robert Mugabe.
Wow, those stories are really tough. And of course that for those who are fighting against dictatorships, against regimes, against autocrats, and the path is not easy. They have power, they have control, and they are feared. So as Ivan mentioned, what the dictators, the autocrats want is us to have fear, to not want to fight, to elevate the cost. And I have learned that when the risk to fight is really high, then the need to fight it's even higher, because that is when the country or the people needs us to be courageous. So I want also to understand a different perspective, right? How are these challenges in a democratic country like the US? Because the context for you it's completely different, but still you are working in favor of democracy every day. So I can imagine that for you it's not easy.
Well, I agree that the stories that were just told have informed so much of what I'm about to say. And I was lucky to study international relations and then work in an international context and have my colleagues who were living in different conditions with different governments really inform how I approached my work when I did start working in the US. And when I hear about fear as a tactic, I think about it manifesting really as paralysis and as immiseration and as, something that keeps people complacent. And something that I learned really early on is one of the beautiful things about the US is American ignorance, because we believe we can build anything. We believe we can achieve any challenge. We can win a race. We can defy the odds. And that's beautiful. But that same American ignorance is keeping us complacent and stopping us from dealing with the history that is ours. Our history is that we have a lot more familiarity with the concentration of power and the suppression of other people who are not in that powerful group than we like to realize, understand, and that's by design. There are people who don't want us to think about that as our American identity. And in reality, our history has only let women, Black Americans participate in the democratic process fairly recently. So that reality is really underpinning all the behaviors that we see. And my biggest challenge has not been understanding who in this country is looking to concentrate power and wield it over us. I think that if you look at where power is concentrated, it's who has attention, who has trust, and who does not have attention and who does not trust. So it's pretty easy to see. My biggest challenge has been that the people who are well-intentioned, pro-democracy actors, let's call them, and you can think of whoever you want in that category, getting them to change their behavior and to recognize their own participation in what is enabling the strength of the authoritarian actors was a big shock for me and has taken up the majority of my time and energy, trying to get these well-intentioned people to loosen their grip on what they think is and understand we are in a new paradigm. The framing of a lot of the conversations I've been in have been truth versus falsehood, when really the framing should have been trust versus doubt.
Well,
or attention versus no attention. And that is something that has stalled progress and moving towards something that will look like a system that people can actually engage with and trust, that has kept the authoritarian actors very easily able to plant seeds of doubt and pour fire on them, whether they're foreign state actors or they're domestic actors. And are the resistance that people have and the unwillingness they have to sort of let go and say, this system that I've been participating in, though it is democratic and though we have been fighting to make it more democratic, it has lost the trust of people. And their failure to acknowledge that and then put systems in place to rebuild that trust is what I confront every day, whether I'm talking about disinformation or I'm talking about growth hacking and figuring out how to maximize the algorithm to try to have high quality information, actually holding people's attention, or whether I'm telling people about Robert Putnam's research and how people are no longer joining groups. And you can't have a participatory democracy if you don't have people joining groups and knowing each other, because then they won't trust each other. All of those conversations, the barrier becomes the people who are well-intentioned and claim to want to fight the bad guys not being able to see and invest in these realities or these solutions or what we know works from our colleagues abroad and from, systems that are much more far along in the regression and suppression of freedoms. I sort of, we only have 3 minutes, we're supposed to only have 3 minutes to answer our challenges, and that's so hard because there's so many challenges, but I think that we've spent a lot of time pointing out that Americans are not so keen. You all are here showing up to this conversation. The vast majority of Americans would not show up to this conversation. And authoritarian leaders don't need people to believe or buy or even support what they're saying. They only need them distracted, entertained, sleeping, scared enough to not, go along and organize and fight back. And so trying to engage the American population who is very comfortable and complacent, who, by design is sort of, we're educated and raised to think of our own way in the world and the way that we've influenced all good things in the world. And frankly, the way that the counter to that only provides negatives and doesn't provide a way forward and doesn't provide an opportunity to build forward and build trust and, really take all of the good sides of the things that have caused us to wreak havoc in the world and build something better and new. That's what I circle around all the time, every day.
No, and that is such a perfect explanation because it also allows me to reflect on our situation in Venezuela. So I have always believed that distraction is one of the most powerful tools for autocratic dictatorships and regimes, So in the case of Venezuela, I strongly believe that our economic crisis have been created intentionally by the regime, because on one side, you see how much money they spend on personal things, on military equipment, or just on corruption. But at the same time, we have our population without food, without medicine, without gas, without electricity, and without water, because that is a distraction. When you have to fight every day to find food, when you don't have electricity, when going to a protest is so expensive because the price that you pay is your life, then you cannot fight against the regime. So all of these distractions, of course, are according to the tools and the capacities of every context, right? But at the end, they apply the same way. So we are going to our final reflections. So we open the discussion to all of you for you to ask questions to our panelists. But before going to the questions, I want a last round, very quick, just in one sentence. Why are you still fighting? This is the message of hope. And after that, we will start with questions. So first, Dr. Sanjay.
Okay, I'll be very short. In Buddhism, we say, you're born and you die. These are two inevitable things, right? So, because, you are going to die, so issue is while you live, what you do. And recently I read somewhere that 100 years after your death, even your family members will forget you, right? Now, in this room, how many of you remember your great grandfather or great grandmother? Okay, so most of us have forgotten them. So now we are in this world for a short period of time when even your family members are going to forget you, forget about the rest of the world. Now the challenge open you is what do you do while you live? Do you live for yourself? Yeah, you can do. You can hoard all the wealth and all the name, everything, but even your family members will forget you in 100 years, okay? So it's better to devote your life for your society, your community, your world. So at least even the world and your family might not remember you, but at least you will feel better before you die that, okay, I left something for this world, for environment, for climate change, for community, for justice, for any project or the passion that you want to pursue.
Even.
I've always said when I've been asked why I've continued the work that I do, even now we continue to advocate for Zimbabwe. And one of the things I've often said to people is you have to understand that the story of your nation will one day be told. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 500 years from now, the story of your nation, this nation, other nations will be told. And it'll be told in our absence, just as you've heard. And it'll be told whether we agree with it or not. It'll be told whether whether we have something to say or not. But the one thing that they must never be able to say is that we did nothing. My point is that it's not okay to do nothing, even when it feels like we're not going to win, even when it feels like the whole thing is falling apart. Doing nothing is quite possibly the worst thing that could ever be done. And it's the philosophy that we embodied in our small movement that started out in my church office with only myself, and then grew to 4 people, and then grew to a couple of thousand people, and then eventually became a movement that could move 12 million people. And whilst we didn't bring change to Zimbabwe, what we left is a narrative that ordinary people have the power, that it is possible for people to be able to rally each other, ignite their courage, speak truth to power, and figure out a way forward. And so what we have left is something that cannot be unseen, and evidence for future generations to find their space, play their part, so that those that come after them can pick it up from there and take it forward and not have to pay the bill that they didn't pay. Every one of us must play our part.
Your?
Asking me why I fight is kind of like asking me, why am I awake?
Why? We want to know why.
I mean, I think that to not fight would be similar to being asleep. And I believe that people have the right to live well. I actually believe that one of the beautiful things that the American promise, even if it has been undermined and not been lived out in many ways, what the American promise has suggested is that people have the right to live well. And I believe that, democracy happens to be the best system for balancing, protecting personal freedoms and managing our collective existence. And, I don't see a world where people can be happy, truly happy and living well if they are not engaging in care for the collective around them. And I would be so miserable to be sleeping in this moment because we would feel it. Even if it maybe, would be numbed for a while, we would feel it. And my worst fear is actually, somebody asked me this recently. They said, I was with some folks who have military backgrounds and they were expressing that their biggest fear was nuclear war. And I said, that is scary. And another scary thing to me is despair and being so immiserated that you can't participate and you lose your agency. And that's what I'm fighting against. And that's what keeps me from staying in bed or scrolling till I die.
Well, so now, before starting with the question, I'm going to ask all of you a question, and I want you to answer. Are you awake? Are you awake? Are you gonna fight? Are you gonna sleep? What are you gonna do? I believe all of you are awake because that's why you are here. You are not at home sleeping. You are not just, I don't know, attending your classes with credits. Actually, you are here in this one, which nobody's forcing you to do it. So thank you so much for being awake, and thank you so much for worrying about your people, your country, and the world. Now, your questions. Albani here.
I have a question for you, and it's that ultimately with like this new administration on their way.
Can you make it louder?
I think
You can do it. You can project your voice.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, go for it. Okay. Do I go with, okay.
Yeah.
My question is that knowing of like this recent administration and the way they have been handling social media with like tweet, like X and Trump's like comments and then the White House posting, so like I was crying, like, how do you feel this new democracy is gonna be handled with the way that they're using social media?
The current administration is very talented in controlling the information that they would like people to hear and that they would like to represent them in their causes. They've been good at this for many years. So the infrastructure that they have been building, so they can have their own infrastructure telling their own story is quite extensive. It is decentralized. They also have happened to align with other people who are interested in the concentration of power, who own information spaces like social media platforms. I actually would say a lot of what they do in terms of how they communicate is useful. And they think about message discipline. They think about speaking in plain language. They think about showing up in spaces that, frankly, a lot of the people in the pro-democracy movement have been unwilling to show up in simply because it's their ego or psychology, or that would mean they'd have to admit that maybe their own profession is less relevant or their own skill set is a little less relevant than they thought it was. It's really a lot of ego-based behavior. And there's a lot to learn from that. I think that, and this is sometimes an unpopular opinion, but when this administration came into power, I was relieved in a sense, because not in all senses, but in a sense, because I said there's going to be such a clear display now of the way that attention and information is concentrated. And it's not going to be something we can argue about. It's going to be very clear. And I hope that because of almost how perfect they are in their sort of communication control tactics, I hope that it's more illustrative than other moments where we might have been debating, well, the coverage, this coverage is this way, that coverage is that way. Well, now it's direct from the source and we can see what they're doing. And I like to talk a lot about how I hope that people seek context more than they seek truth. Because if we're debating over like what's true and false, it's just kind of a non-starter. What we can debate is the context. So the motivations behind what information is being shared. What other information might have inspired what's being shared. And already I can see that that's a lot of the conversation that's spinning off. What's coming from this administration is more contextual conversations. That said, I still think that if people don't understand that it is an illusion to think you have freedom over the information you're consuming right now in this environment, if people don't reckon with that and get mad, and they don't say, wow, I'm really mad, I've been relegated to this part of the information ecosystem. This is what the systems in power have decided I deserve to hear and understand. And I don't have much choice and I don't have much freedom in that. If people don't get angry about that, I think they're going to be very successful in sort of having their message discipline hack the attention of folks and always serve as the most consistent message defining what our system is and what an alternative to the brokenness of our institutions should be.
Thank you so much. We're going to take 2 more questions, but let's ask those questions at the same time so they will distribute the time for the answer. One here and the other one? Just that? Okay, right here.
In the case of Trump, he's put together a coalition of people who have very contradictory ideas, that there are libertarians who argue that the progressive regulatory state is the side that's suppressed liberty. And then there are people who see Trump, yes, he's a dictator, a demagogue, but when he gets absolute power, he'll establish a kind of virtuous Christian theocracy, which is what we want. So I'm wondering, is there an argument or a position that would fracture the coalition in the sense of people who call themselves conservatives? Well, a lot of what Trump is doing is very anti-conservative, anti-virtue. Thomas Aquinas would find it abominable, is abominable lying. And that could be framed as a recollection of the spirit of 1976 against dictatorship of the king and so on. So is there an argument that would break the sycophancy that unites the regime?
Okay, and the last question?
Thank you all for coming. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.
And I don't want to neglect the panelists on Zoom, but your situation is so philosophical. I don't know that you actually know the literature behind that, but this notion of sleep and rationality and all that is wonderful. On top of that is you mentioned that these people that you're confronting are well-intentioned, and I believe this. And your situation is different in that all you have to do is clear up a misunderstanding. And you described yourself as a strategist. So I was wondering, what strategy are you employing? Would it help to have a well-intentioned actor say, yes, I'm that guy, I'm a fool, I am recanting what I used to believe, and this is how I now believe? How beneficial would that be? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to answer that one first. So I have many strategies, but one strategy. So for example, I worked in Washington. I worked for the Democrats in 2020. I left Washington and stopped working for the Democrats, quite mad and frustrated about what I had experienced. And I think that that story is a very useful story for me to tell right now, to earn some credibility among all the people who might be frustrated with the Democrats or politicians or Washington or the system. I mean, I moved to London after that, and I chose to move back to Chicago, not to DC, and that's for a reason. And I think there's a lot of resonance with that sentiment in a lot of the people. So to your point, yes, I think people who have participated in the system, who are seeing how it's broken, seeing what's not advancing things, have a real role to play. And that's one of my strategies. Another one of my strategies is to tell as many people as possible who feel overwhelmed by the moment. I mean, Chicago is really full of well-intentioned people, I would say, who care about democracy and care about the country. And what I've been saying to them is, if, I'm noticing, okay, calling their congressman seems pretty futile to many of them. They don't feel like that's doing anything. And instead of trying to convince them that that does do something in a time when majority opinion has gun control passing and it doesn't, majority opinion has child online safety passing and it doesn't, I'm not going to force people to call Congress. Instead, I've been telling people to take a look at Robert Putnam's research, the Join or Die documentary that came out in 2023, which shows just how useful it is to just join or start a group and grow its membership. Just do that. An online group, an in-person group, grow a group, join a group, grow its membership, have more people coming than came the last week, and invest in those people. There was a quote from a colleague, he's a pastor, and lives on the Georgetown campus. And he said, you can't surge trust in a crisis. You
Yes.
can surge money, you can surge information, you can't surge trust. So the work to do if you feel hopeless is to build trust somewhere, somehow. And that means you got to go and interact with people who maybe you don't have trust with. And then to your point about the fractures in the sort of conservative coalition and what's possible there, I think that conservatives are, in many cases, service-oriented and pragmatic, and they believe themselves to be. And I think that ultimately the people who are holding, let's say, the purse strings or the power levers right now in the country are more often than not interested in getting things done and actually crossing the finish line on reforms. They're very interested in communicating as if things are being done. But I think that I'm already seeing and noticing that those people who are in the coalition who actually want their cause advanced are very frustrated with the decisions that are being made to really only advance self-interest and only advance commercial causes. And I don't know if that will be enough. Frankly, my biggest concern is this administration and others have given people so many things to wedge audiences with. There's lots of things people don't like about this administration. But if people defect from their support, which frankly, people supporting this administration is not what got them elected. It's the lack of participation in our process that got them elected. But when people defect from this administration or activate to participate, if there is not a credible alternative that is actually addressing the ways in which our systems are broken and is only saying, let's go back, let's defend these institutions that aren't delivering you anything you've been asking for or fixing any of your problems, they or people around them will continue to win. If they continue to just be the most credible, organized movement that is addressing anything that needs fixing in this country, they'll keep winning. So those are some of the fractures I noticed, but I can't say that they're giving me all the hope in the world because I really need a credible alternative to present itself, or a couple would be even better.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We have more events coming, office hours, and also, well, you know, the ILP is a safe space for everybody. Thank you so much.